you're adding up these things. They're sedentary. They work all day. They're not going to really start working out. Where do they go? They have very low energy. They're not going to change some of these things. Does that mean that testosterone is like this magic bullet to wipe these things away?
This is Generation Health. Every week, we bring you the latest in news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices, helping you live better, longer. Sitting to my right, Dante DiMatteo, PharmD, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. How are you, my friend?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And across from me, Joey DiMatteo. Glad to have you back. PharmD, board-certified clinical nutritionist. Welcome back, my friend.
Good to be back. Thank you.
And actually, I'm very excited because that means 1, 2, 3 mics. We don't have a mic for Josiah anymore. He's gone. You don't have to listen to his voice ever again.
Psych!
Wait, you guys gave him a mic? Why did we do that?
I'm still here, baby. The people voted.
Gentlemen, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking a little bit about testosterone and testosterone replacement therapy, hypogonadism.
That sounds exciting.
The whole umbrella.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
cool.
we'll touch on what we can today.
Fair enough.
Right.
But first, what is happening behind the counter? Some pharmacy news, a little bit of health news first. The Red Cross has issued a major statement. The blood supply in the U.S. has reached critically low levels. In fact, they are calling it a life and death shortage. According to the release, donor levels are at their lowest in over 20 years, off as much as 40% from their all-time highs. Just between Christmas and New Year's of 2023, they had a 7,000 unit shortfall. While the decline has been steady, the COVID-19 pandemic rapidly accelerated the drop, particularly with people working remotely, meaning pop-up blood drives were far less effective. On a personal note, I've had 3 immediate family members all need blood or platelets at some point in time as life-saving and life-extending treatments. I've personally given well over 100 times, a total volume of over 10 gallons. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that true because they sent me a little pin. It was cool. I have a little pelt pen if I wanted to.
Man, that's incredible.
Wear a pen.
It really is.
And you guys can help too. If you can, please donate. Anyone 17 years old and older can go try and donate. You have to weigh at least 110 pounds. But beyond that, it's easy. It's not painful. It's actually kind of relaxing. And they have cookies. So that's always a plus. And if you come this Friday, I'll be there. So you might see me.
How'd you start doing this? Like, what was your impetus to start it?
It's a very long story, but the 2-second version was a pop-up blood drive at my church. And we were super, super poor at the time. And I was like, yeah, I'll donate blood. No problem. So I went in to donate blood. And I looked across from me and saw somebody that I knew was very, very wealthy, was also donating. And it occurred to me in that moment that his donation was no more valuable than mine. And it was a way that I could give that matched somebody who could literally give millions of dollars, but it didn't matter. They just needed somebody to sit there for a little bit. And so that became a big thing that I did as often as possible. So
It's not equal giving. It's equal sacrifice.
yeah, there you go. I like that.
That's why he has a mic.
Yeah. Well, be careful. We'll see. According to Google Trends, the keyword sleep hit an all-time high in 2023. And while the specific number of searches wasn't revealed, it comes as no surprise to the Sleep Foundation after their recent survey revealed that 37% of U.S. adults surveyed slept, quote, somewhat or much worse in 2023. Those in Gen Z, roughly the ages of 18 to 24, had it the worst, with 45% of them reporting worse sleep in 2023. The survey also found that people tried all sorts of different things to improve their sleep. 34% of men tried exercising more, 23% of women tried limiting caffeine, and 24% of all respondents tried creating a bedtime routine. It wasn't surprising to see sleep numbers get worse during the pandemic, as stress can be a major impediment to sleep, but these numbers are surprising given the relative calm of 2023. And if you want to try to improve your sleep, we would suggest watching episode 1 of this podcast. We did a sleep deep dive because sleep is a very important subject. How was your sleep last year?
Last year?
Yeah, 2023. Was it somewhat or much worse? About the same, somewhat or much better?
It was about the same, I would say.
That's good.
I ended up doing that sleep study.
Did you?
Yeah.
And what was the result?
And I have mild sleep apnea.
Really?
Yeah. So I ended up getting a CPAP.
Did you really?
Yeah. And I've the handful of times that I used it, it's, covers my nose and mouth. I just wake up in a panic after like 2 hours of sleeping. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get this thing off.
Feels like something's on top of your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my sleep in 23 could have probably been better
if you'd used
if
your
I
CPAP.
would use it. But it was actually through the Sleep Foundation that I think I suggested before to do that. I still think I want to have maybe an in-lab study or go through my primary care doctor to get it done again.
Yeah.
Just to make sure. But in the interim, I think I can get the mask with just covers your nose instead of your mouth potentially. It's pretty hard to get used
I don't know
to.
how people do it. It looks really uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if the alternative is not sleeping well, and maybe it's one of those things like a lot of this you get used to, but yeah.
There's a lot of different settings. Because literally it's like pushing air in. So it's kind of like, imagine you walk it past a fan that's like blowing air and you're like,
That would be weird. Well, but you're sleeping. So why is that
sleeping.
happening?
Yeah.
That was strange.
That was a tangent, but that's what you get for asking me how my year of sleep was.
That's what I wanted to know. I didn't know that was what you were going to say, but I'm glad. All right. What are we talking about? We're talking about testosterone, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Help me out.
Big topic.
What do we got? So testosterone is a hormone. I know it's primarily, it's the primary male hormone. And that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Yeah, it's the body's natural androgen. Androgen literally means the male sex hormone. So it's a substance capable of developing, maintaining masculine characteristics in reproductive tissues. So that's the genital tract, secondary sexual characteristics, as well as fertility. So again, that's just kind of the basic definition of it.
And that just means it affects like everything, right? I mean, not everything, but nearly everything in the body.
Correct.
It has huge implications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, and again, there's a lot of different levels we can, or different issues we can go into. And in terms of in the body, there are 3 major surges of it.
Okay.
The third surge is a little interesting. It kind of stays. We'll get into some nuance of that, but there's a surge during the first trimester of fetal development.
Right.
That's just nuts and bolts, literally male genital tract differentiation. There's also a second surge, which this was interesting to me, in the early life of a newborn. It's almost like a mini puberty. So it occurs in the hours following birth, peaks around 1 to 3 months, drops back down around 6 months. This is less explicitly understood, but what I found was interesting is that it's believed to involve the formation of the sexually dimorphic characteristics. That is a fancy way of saying the difference between the sexes. Yeah. So, and I know this can get complicated, but we're speaking on average and we're speaking typically. Why are young boys maybe typically a little more aggressive than young girls?
Right.
Why do young boys want to have a girlfriend in first grade? Those kind of things. And it's because they believe that during these first few months, that is where, outside of testosterone mediated effects throughout the body, that on the brain and just the thought processes, that's where some of that is differentiated.
I actually know a little bit about this. I get to be an expert for half a second here. During the what is it, like the 16th week of fetal development, when that happens, something like that, there is a bath of testosterone on the male brain, and it causes the hemispheres, particularly the right hemisphere, to shrink slightly, and it breaks a bunch of the corpus callosum between the 2 hemispheres. And that's the connections that allow the 2 hemispheres to talk to each other. And that is why women have women's intuition and men don't. It's because both hemispheres of their brain are able to communicate back and forth much more rapidly, but we can't. We have to take it a piece at a time and think process wise all the way through it. It's fun.
That is interesting. And there's obviously a lot of nature versus nurture going on there, a lot of nuance there. But again, we're just talking like the most baseline level. I found that interesting.
It also means that all men are brain damaged. So we're born brain damaged. Just
We have an excuse.
fun fact. All right. So
And then
anyway,
that third one begins in puberty. Pretty
Okay.
obvious, but and if you're looking at a graph of it, it's like the little spike during the first trimester, back down. A spike during the first month to 3 months, back down around 6 months. And then the third one isn't so much a spike. It's a spike in terms of it going up,
right.
but it goes back down very gradually over decades. So when you're looking at it, the line based on time, it's got that third one has a very unique look to it. That's obviously the one we're going to focus on. That's the one that gets very nuanced and has, multifactorial, effects on our life. Also different things in our body that, can affect it.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So at puberty primarily is when the big one happens that has the biggest impact, on what we're talking about. Obviously in the obvious physiological changes and all that stuff, what happens over time? You said it tapers over time every decade?
Yeah. As we age, our testosterone goes down in the most just basic form. It happens at different levels. Some people, pinpoint this age or that age, but a lot of the charts I've seen, it's a pretty steady decline. I don't know if you've had any more nuance to that, but yeah, in the most simplest form.
Right. Like Joey's saying, in general, it does taper off, but that's where, I think eventually we can get into some of the, the pathology of testosterone declining for one reason or another. But the issue there is that there's just this pervasive thought in popular culture that, see, testosterone's just going down across the male population. It's responsible for so many of our issues. And all we got to do is be a little more open to supplementing with it. And so I think, in essence, with this conversation, we want to shed a little more light and nuance to that idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Not to steer us too far from the physiology.
No, it's a huge topic, obviously, but I think it's like a microcosm of everything nowadays. There's one article about this. My mood is bad. Testosterone helped it. I'm overweight. It's because my estrogen's high because my testosterone's low. I'm stressed out. My sex drive is low. My libido's low. And everything we all want this one answer. If I take testosterone, it's going to fix all these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what we'll try to get into here. Not to solve it, but just as maybe an individual out there is trying to make a decision for how they proceed. I assume we're talking to the, not so much the bodybuilder crowd, but maybe like the 40s, 50s. They're trying to make a decision there. And hopefully we can shed some light on maybe that process.
And just to address that real quickly, testosterone is the primary, not supplement, but the steroids. That's what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when people are taking an anabolic steroid,
It's testosterone or some derivative of what we're physiologically making.
and we're not talking about that.
We're
Not really. We're not talking about steroid, but bodybuilding.
right. We're not talking about supra physiologic doses of TRT.
Radically higher than the body naturally makes.
Juicing.
I mean, certainly people who end
Yeah.
up taking TRT for, a medical reason, sometimes, based upon the form or their specific reaction to the drug, they might end up with super physiologic levels of serum testosterone, but doesn't always happen. And there's ways to work around that.
Got it. Okay. All right. So as we age, our testosterone declines. You said roughly every decade it goes down a certain amount. And that's normal. That's the way God designed us. That's how things are more or less supposed to happen. But what happens when that's occurring? What are the typical signs of someone's testosterone being in decline?
Yeah, I mean, depressed mood can be one of them. There's a lot of nuance to that. There's some, brain fog, fatigue, and then certainly loss of muscle mass, just general energy levels. There can be increased, fat, BMI, sexual symptoms, sex drive. Again, that's another very nuanced one. But when you're looking at the picture, the more of these you can kind of combine. Those are major things for sure.
Absolutely.
Especially if they're in combination, Yeah,
the problem with a lot of those is they're often non-specific symptoms.
Absolutely.
Granted, loss of libido, erectile dysfunction, those sorts of sexual issues, they matched with a low serum testosterone can can certainly lead you in the direction of a, situation of hypogonadism. But in general, a lot of these are, non-specific, and that's what makes it often challenging to diagnose.
So, okay, you've said hypogonadism a couple times now.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
So nowadays, when, if we just look at almost, maybe we go back and look at the kind of the clinical workup potentially of low testosterone, we'll call it, they will distinguish hypogonadism as primary or secondary.
Okay.
And so in looking at primary or secondary, that will help guide, treatment and, understand.
Definition wise, what is hypo means lower, right? And gonadism meaning function of the gonads.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so to even back up a little further, all of this dysfunction starts potentially at the level of the brain. So the hypothalamus sends a signal to the anterior pituitary gland, which secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then stimulates the production of LH and FSH, things that we've talked about more recently in terms of female hormones.
Right.
So it's this axes that are reflective of the kind of the neuroendocrine system that can at least, one, it helps us understand how our sex hormones are synthesized. And it also can help us understand at maybe which level of this axis is there a problem, which can help figure out why maybe somebody has low serum testosterone.
Okay.
And so,
but not everybody who has lower testosterone than they did when they were 25 is hypogonadal.
that's a good point.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. There's individual variation. There's going to be some natural decline over time.
Right.
And the other side of this is that there are the age related decline that we see. Is it purely based on chronological age? That's the big question. And from my understanding of what we've read and what I've listened to, is that's not the case. It's more of a marker of more of a reflection of the chronic illnesses that we're facing as we age.
Interesting.
And so it's not that always testosterone decline is what's causing these cardiovascular issues, causing insulin resistance. It's often the opposite.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that the reverse can't be true. I mean, this is like Joey said, this is a humongous topic. We
Right.
can't pick apart every study. But again, I think if I had to put my eggs in one basket, it is that serum testosterone changes over time are more of a reflection, again, of metabolic status. What sort of chronic diseases have you been exposed to as you age? And so it might flip that. It might flip the understanding of this whole issue, might flip that on its head for somebody who thinks, well, like you said, you get older, testosterone declines. That's maybe going to be the first, second, or third thing that I jump to when all of a sudden I'm having some non-specific symptoms as I age.
Got it.
So if anything, when we're looking at a clinical workup, the good practitioner, sure, based on your symptoms, they might get a morning serum testosterone. They might start looking at different hormones. They're also going to say, maybe we need to look at more subclinical cardiovascular disease, subclinical coronary, artery disease. Look at insulin sensitivity. Is this person pre-diabetic? To the point of erectile dysfunction, let's just say, there's issues with the kind of the microvascular system there. And so something like that stands out to some as, oh, that's a black and white, that's a testosterone issue. It could be related to that, but that could also be related to, a very early issue with cardiovascular disease or diabetes. And I know I kind of went off the beaten path there, but again, that's just why this is so nuanced, and you got to see this from all sides.
Okay. Having established kind of the baseline of this is what it looks like, this is how it behaves, this is normal. Mm-hmm. Take you off the leash. Where do you want to go with that? You're talking about hypogonadism. We're talking about TRT as a subject. If my testosterone has declined, regardless of why, right? Maybe I gained weight. Maybe I'm pre-diabetic, maybe whatever the case may be. My testosterone has declined. If increasing my testosterone will alleviate a lot of these symptoms, why is that not the first thing that we go to?
So obviously that's a really, really good question for sure. I think too, what really complicates, again, a complicated issue here is that there are some things that, just being quite honest, people are not going to change.
Yeah.
If somebody's already overweight and whatever they like, because we can go into this too, but alcohol definitely increases aromatase, which increases the conversion of testosterone to estrogens, which can kind of lower manifestation of testosterone in the body. So you're adding up these things. They're sedentary. They work all day. They're not going to really start working out. Where do they go? They have very low energy. They're not going to change some of these things. Does that mean that testosterone is like this magic bullet to wipe these things away? I think that is a common decision that people, when they go to maybe an alternative type provider or somebody in those cases, I think that's again where this gets really complicated, because like Dante's saying, you can deal with some of these root issues, start working out, cut down on alcohol, check maybe your thyroid, see how things are working, and maybe try to deal with it that way, let alone if they're smoking, etc. Just high cholesterol, a lot of different things that go into play there. As you're trying to navigate this, how do you make that determination of, well, I'm going to do something to feel better. I'm going to do something to increase my libido. I'm going to do something to, maybe they believe that's their impetus to get off the couch, so to say, or maybe it's a little bit of a shortcut to cut down some of that adipose tissue. So I don't think we're here to give that answer because of how individualized this is. For right now, especially I think in this first part, maybe we'll get into some more details, in another one. But I don't know what your maybe more thoughts are there, but
yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of like, when I think about your question, it is there. Each situation is going to be very different.
Sure.
But at the same time, that's the question I get all the time, really, from, my friends' parents and, people that come into the pharmacy, people who know we have a compounding pharmacy. It's just, we're sort of, in one way or another, we're very much surrounded by these questions, a little more than the average person. And again, based upon my understanding of where things currently sit from an evidence-based perspective, as good of a question as that is, again, we don't have the perfect answer for it. There's still a part of that that's just a kind of a fundamental misunderstanding. So it's not that you are in any way, shape, or form trying to withhold TRT from somebody. It's just that the workup is so much more complicated than that. And we don't know for certain that nor is it recommended to use testosterone as a means to improve somebody's glycemic control, to improve, somebody's cardiovascular health. Yes, there could potentially be some downstream effects, but it's very hard to parse out a lot of that information. Now, I think if we delineate two sides of this, that sure, if we're talking quality of life, that yes, this there's no doubt that increasing testosterone to a certain point can improve somebody's quality of life. It can improve mood, but even to what extent, there are just enough studies, especially if we look at the most recent set of guidelines, that there's not as profound of an effect on mood when you're looking at a population of people who actually need this therapy. It's not like this unlocks your cognitive potential as a person. Sure, again, we can delineate this to what is this going to do for this person's metabolic status, and what maybe could this do for somebody's quality of life. I think that's a very hairy path to take potentially.
Right.
You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's just, I don't know. I just see things a lot differently. I see all of this through a much different lens now.
Okay. All right. So you're talking about the guidelines, the treatment guidelines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. What is it that determines on a broad level whether or not somebody is a good candidate for TRT?
So the key would be, just looking at someone's history, a physical examination. The key point is to establish that there is a baseline, that there are baseline symptoms here. Is somebody showing signs of erectile dysfunction? Have they, lost the spontaneous morning? You know what I'm talking about? Those sorts of, maybe uncomfortable things to talk about. Those are the most glaring signs of a testosterone deficiency.
Okay.
So, certainly mood plays into that as well. More of the specific ones that we talked about.
Things like metabolic syndrome, insulin sensitivity, or weight gain. Those are not, the first thought isn't low testosterone.
If for 90% of the people that ask me, that's what they're thinking about.
Right.
I guess that's the.
But that shouldn't be the first thought, is what you're saying.
It should not be.
Okay.
It should not be. 'Cause, in a perfect world, if you begin to correct those things, that it can, we know that can have an effect on testosterone levels. You know what I mean? If someone's obstructive sleep apnea is an issue and it's untreated, we know for a fact that can boost someone's serum testosterone. But before we kind of get lost in that, you have symptoms. The doctor, your doctor has a good reason based upon those symptoms and a physical exam that, all right, we'll do some blood work. So what they'll do is they'll look at a morning fasting total testosterone, and the guideline doesn't specify the time, I believe, but in most places, 8 a.m. is a good bet, and that's something to keep in mind. Fasted 8 a.m. Testosterone serum concentrations, they follow a diurnal variation.
Okay.
And so they're higher in the morning, lower at the end of the day. And so they're upwards of like 30% higher in the morning.
Wow.
So that's critical. If you get 3 measurements taken and they're all late in the day and you're coming up low, then, you potentially take that information with a grain of salt.
Or a classic situation where, hey, and maybe it's totally by coincidence, but you get your level checked and maybe you're not quite low, but you're borderline, and you happen to get that test in the morning. That's when your work schedule worked out. And then you get tested again 6 months later. It happens to be in the afternoon and your level's lower. There may have been no physiological reason for that other than those diurnal rhythms. So I know Dante had more to say there, but I think that's a critical piece because that can be something just random and coincidental that would have a dramatic effect on how your treatment.
So hopefully your practitioner's
decisions go.
paying attention to that.
Yes.
And you said fasted. Does diet have something to do with testosterone levels?
Yes. So your current nutrition status, glucose, all those sorts of things can change, how your testosterone might fluctuate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
so the point is it's just easier to control as many variables as you can.
Absolutely. Right.
So you measure morning serum testosterone. If there is a low, if it does come up low, which 300 nanograms per deciliter, we'll call it.
300 nanograms, you were below it or above that?
Below it.
Okay, so if you're below 300 nanograms per deciliter, they would do a second reading just to confirm?
Yes. And again, to reiterate the key points, they would do it in the morning, likely fasted, just to keep all variables the same.
Right.
Again, testosterone follows that diurnal variation. You want to get the morning measurement, which is critical. If that reading also is low, then you can essentially confirm the presence of low testosterone in that case. Now there's much more to it than that. Even.
Of course.
So there are situations where you would want to look at someone's free testosterone as well. And so testosterone doesn't just float around in the blood on its own.
Okay.
The majority of it is bound to something called sex hormone binding globulin.
Okay.
And that proportion of the testosterone is rendered inactive, we'll call it. And then the remaining portion, or the free testosterone, is, again, the free testosterone, which is actually floating freely. Plus there's some testosterone bound to albumin. There's some that's bound to other carriers related to the adrenals. Mm-hmm. And that makes up a very low percentage, but you have this, the SHBG portion, which is inactive. And then you have this other portion, which is actually what they now consider the bioactive or the bioavailable portion of testosterone.
Okay.
And there are many different health conditions and situations where someone's sex hormone binding globulin could be super elevated or it could be super low, and that throws off the total measurement.
Oh, so if it's binding more than it should be because there's more of the sex hormone binding globulin, then
it can give you a skewed reading. And so that's a great example of where free testosterone is incredibly useful.
Okay.
Now the problem is there are, depending on the lab, depending on a multitude of factors, it's just a little more difficult to get a free testosterone level that you're super confident in.
Sure.
Now, granted, these sorts of tests have come a long way, but this measurement can actually be measured, or it can just be calculated based upon some of the other values. And so, just kind of an interesting tidbit there. So, not everybody really needs needs this free T measurement. Again, it is more geared towards somebody who they might feel has some changes in the sex hormone binding globulin. So somebody with type 2 diabetes is a situation where that's a good example of where it would be different. But there's a laundry list of conditions.
Okay.
In that case.
So it's not everybody. Even if your testosterone level is low, it not everyone is a good candidate necessarily for the free T measurement.
It's just, I'm sure that your doctor would probably just measure it anyway.
Right. Because
it's just a part of a battery of tests. It's just that it's probably going to tell you the same thing that the total testosterone is, unless again, there's some other reason to believe that you need to look at that a little more closely.
Okay.
And so for example, in addition to, I'm glad you said that, because in addition to the SHGB, BG, you would also want to look at free testosterone for somebody who's maybe borderline low. And so you're looking at, and there are a couple other measures that we would want to look at as well. But somebody who does have a borderline measure, maybe right around 300, maybe just below 300, you can look at free testosterone to confirm, or you look at, or in that case, you would look at the bioavailable, the bioactive form of testosterone to then guide your decision as well.
Okay.
So it can be very nuanced in and of that one measurement.
Obviously.
And then also in this battery of tests, you are also going to measure luteinizing hormone and FSH, which we started talking about a little bit. Those are responsible for ultimately the downline production of testosterone and the downline production of spermatogenesis. So the production of sperm in the testes. So that's even where kind of the fertility tie-in lies. But both of those hormones, which are released from ultimately the pulsatile release of that gonadotropin releasing hormone, those will then loop us back to how do we distinguish this as primary or secondary hypogonadism. Once we looked at the symptoms, once we looked at the free testosterone, the total testosterone, got us to this point, looked at LH, looked at FSH. Now we can begin to understand what's causing this.
Okay. So primary versus secondary, you mentioned that a couple of times. What is the difference in those two?
So the easiest way to describe that would be looking at the physiology, I think.
Yeah.
And so you have a battery of blood tests done. Let's just say we determined that testosterone is low.
Right.
If we have low or inappropriately normal LH and FSH, that would be considered secondary hypogonadism. And so it's secondary in the sense that there is, that it's not the testes, or it's not that the issues of hypogonadism is not coming from that, that part of the body, so to speak.
Okay. Because the testes are responsible for the primary production of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's why it's very important to, again, just try to tie in that feedback mechanism in that, okay, we know at the baseline level, testosterone is low. That is then signaling the brain to release more gonadotropin releasing hormone. And then you get to that next step and the body is not releasing FSH and LH.
Okay.
And so then that shows you, okay, not only is testosterone low in the blood, but we can also see that FSH and LH is low. And we know that there's some issue secondary causing testosterone ultimately to be low. And that,
Because if FSH and LH are low, then the testes are never going to get the signal to release more.
exactly.
Got it.
And so then this in and of itself will guide a whole other, sort of set of tests that potentially will be done. So they'll look at the pituitary gland. They'll look at pituitary hormones. They'll measure prolactin. They'll look for hyperprolactinemia. They'll also look at iron saturation and serum ferritin. Iron overload is a culprit of causing secondary hypogonadism. And so I don't think we need to go completely down the rabbit hole there, but I think that generally encompasses secondary.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's a whole bunch of reasons why testosterone could be low, why you could be hypogonadal, that have nothing to do with your inability to produce more testosterone. You are able to, it's just not happening for a whole bunch of different reasons.
And in general, they call those sort of the more reversible functional causes.
Okay.
And so if somebody, if a male presents with infertility and it's determined that it's due to secondary hypogonadism, there's a better chance that they can, jumpstart the production of testosterone via the increase of this LH and FSH, which there are medications that can help drive that process.
Okay.
And
All right. So if it's not secondary, if it is primary, what are we doing at this point? Is that when we finally start looking at supplementing with testosterone?
Yes. And theoretically, these could exist in some combination as well.
Oh, okay.
So it is,
of course.
It's tough, but from a very basic stepwise process, it just helps, to kind of determine next steps, but it's not always that clean. So primary hypogonadism looks again at LH and FSH concentrations. And if these are inappropriately high and testosterone is still low, then that there's something at the level of the testes that's,
So the signals are being sent, hey,
Yes.
produce more,
And
hey,
it's
produce
not
more,
happening.
and it's not happening.
right. And so
Got
there
it.
are some genetic components to that as well. There's additional karyotyping that can be done, but that one is a little more challenging from the standpoint of reversibility.
Okay. All right. So I guess that's the question. So how do we reverse this? What are if it's primary hypogonadism, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, the LH and the FSH are inappropriately high. The testes are not producing enough testosterone. What are the paths to reversing it?
It's pretty simple. It's just the administration of supplemental testosterone. And there's a multitude of forms that can help restore that. And the goal is to get the testosterone back into a normal range.
Okay.
And it takes lots of monitoring and, there's even much more to determining who's the right candidate. They'll look at, prostate health, risk for prostate cancer. They'll look at your cardiovascular health. They'll look at things like hematocrit. There's still there's so much that goes into it, but wow. Pretending that all the boxes were checked and they were a good candidate, then for all intents and purposes, it's just a matter of, yes, it's what form of testosterone are you going to be using?
So what are the different forms in terms of how would it be administered? You guys have a compounding pharmacy, and I know that that's critical. Why is that critical to this? This isn't just a pill that's produced?
Yeah, you do not take oral testosterone itself, essentially because the liver will inactivate it.
Okay.
You essentially need to do it parenterally, which is basically injection, or transdermally. Transdermal can certainly have some variation. Ideally, what does occur whenever you apply it transdermally, it gets into the stratus corpuscle, and it's a little bit of a reservoir there to be able to release it throughout the day. But it's going to give you a little more even levels potentially, but also maybe a little less predictable levels than injections do.
Okay.
Injections have been shown to have a little bit of, especially with testosterone enanthate, a little bit of peaks and troughs. So there's just, again, something to watch out for. In the most basic sense, do you want to avoid a needle? Or in the other way, do you want to avoid having to do something every day? Maybe you forget. So a lot of it does come down to how do you feel after you take it? What's more convenient for you? A daily non-injection or a less frequent, weekly, bi-weekly injection?
Okay. All right. Wow. All right. That's fascinating. I had no idea about so much of this. You said, so if they're supplementing, whether they're injecting or they're using a patch, there's constant monitoring, trying to get that level back to normal. So you start treatment and you go, I don't know, a few weeks, a few months, check again. If it's not where it should be, then you up the levels. If it's too high, then you drop the levels. Is that the idea?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, at least from what we see on the pharmacy end too, is that there's some dose titration that has to occur. And so if you're doing 100 milligrams intramuscularly once a week, maybe that's enough for some people. For others, that's not enough. They got to go up to 200 or 150. And
it's not just as simple as my level was 200 nanograms per deciliter, so I need 100. It's more complex than that and has to do with how your body responds.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that.
Okay.
How the drug is released, how much you're actually absorbing. I don't know that I can answer that exactly, but there's not like,
it's not simple math.
That like a certain dose is guaranteed to move at a certain level.
Right.
No.
Okay. You guys sound exactly alike sometimes. It's very funny. All right. So we're treating it and we're getting it back into the normal range. Once we start treatment, once we get that testosterone, free testosterone and the bound testosterone to where it should be, I'm feeling good. Maybe I'm losing weight. I'm able to exercise more, yada, yada, yada. Is this perpetual for the rest of my life, or is my body going to jumpstart and get itself back into shape?
That is as a part of deciding whether or not, when you originally get this or worked up for low testosterone, let's say, once you've determined that this is an option, the additional layer that goes into this kind of shared decision-making with your provider is the understanding that this is going to be likely a lifelong endeavor.
Okay.
Which isn't the end of the world.
No, yeah.
Per se. I know that that thought is scary for some people. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do this forever. But when you think about what's physiologically happening, I think there's some reassurance that it just is what it is. All you're doing is supplementing, what your body is already making.
Especially because the body's working on feedback in this case.
Right.
So once you do start giving it, it's much harder to unwind. Now, again, there's nuance, like we keep saying to all this. Somebody's, again, high alcohol user, opiates, very sedentary, extremely overweight, those things, you change major variables, and maybe testosterone is part of a process to get you through that. It's a possibility, but it becomes very difficult once you kind of open. And I think that also goes into why it is such a big decision. It's not just, I'm a little down, I'm a little fatigued, I'm a little overweight. Throw me on some testosterone. It's more nuanced for those reasons, because once you open that can of worms, it's very hard to put them back in.
Yeah. If you're truly hypogonadal, I don't see any situation where you can come off testosterone.
Right. That makes sense.
Because if it's related to sleep apnea, if it's related to obesity, if it's related to all these sorts of things, if those things are addressed, right, then it can be changed. But and again, even with the initial lab work that's done, if some of this is pointing to, different endocrine systems, they'll even look at TSH and your thyroid hormones, and somebody will present with all of these things low, let's just say, or an elevated FSH, elevated TSH or whatever. There was a case study in one of these write-ups that addressing the underlying hypothyroidism kicked somebody back into a normal testosterone range. So the point is not to jump on Joey, but it's just that we are not jumping. Like, I just can't mentally jump to testosterone therapy, period. There's so many things that we put the cart before the horse so easily in this circumstance,
right,
that it could have been a matter of addressing your thyroid hormone that helped get your testosterone back into a normal range.
And that's a big deal, because once you start, you're on it for life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So if that wasn't the solution that needed to be in place, congratulations, you're stuck with it forever regardless. Okay. That makes more sense then, especially why people should exercise some caution before jumping to that as a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about then.
And we glossed over even idiopathic hypogonadism. So you went through this whole, extensive workup, and we don't know necessarily what the specific cause was. So there is certainly a bucket of unknown.
Okay.
And that would render somebody like, hey, look, risk benefits, put them on some test. It is what it is. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
You know? So like, it's just that I think there's key points that people need to hear.
Okay. So to that end, if somebody has gone through the test, they've gotten this but they are not a candidate for TRT, or they're hesitant to move into that space. I mean, you said diet plays a role. I know you mentioned sleep apnea and sleep, and we've talked about all those other things. What are there any lifestyle modifications or changes other than just lose weight, stop drinking, don't use opioids, that can radically help someone improve their testosterone levels?
I'm probably not the person to ask.
Okay.
Because just
maybe I'm not asking you. Maybe I'm asking Joey.
You're certainly not asking me.
I'm definitely not.
Yeah, I think a lot of the case is if you're on that borderline and you say, hey, I am overweight. I know I keep harping on similar things, but I am overweight. I am sedentary. I work a stressful job. I mean, even cortisol can interplay into that same feedback mechanism and actually lower your testosterone via its effect on some of those precursor hormone signaling pathways.
Wow.
So, and Dante mentioned thyroid. So, again, if you kind of clean up some things related to your weight and diet, and again, we're discussing somebody that's on the borderline. It's like,
right.
Hey, my level, I'm kind of low normal, but I really could use that boost. I don't feel like working out. I'm tired, in the mornings, afternoons. If that's the case, and you look at some other things again related to cortisol, thyroid, I know it's always easier said than done, but lose some weight and begin working out, especially strength training exercises. You potentially can, at least, even if you're not moving your testosterone level per se, maybe you can alleviate some of those symptoms that you're dealing with in an indirect way to help you feel better and to maybe alleviate some of the symptoms that you're associating to low testosterone that maybe are just related to the fact that you're overweight, really stressed, sedentary, and don't eat well.
Yes. And that was something I've heard you mention before, that just because maybe your testosterone level is below what is considered normal, but if you are not having symptoms, there's no reason to jump the gun and get treatment or anything like that. Like, to some extent, just
you always tie those two together. Yeah, you don't want to be taking testosterone in any form if you can't even. There's enough controversy if you do have some of the symptoms and you're very slightly low, or let alone if that's not the case. So yeah, good point to clear up for sure.
Okay, so this is all way more complex than I initially realized. I had no idea about so much of this, which is crazy to say because I'm a man. I should know how my body functions. And even sitting here and listening to this first person, I'm still swimming a little bit. This seems a lot more complex than just, I heard an ad on the radio, and so I'm going to go to the clinic and they're going to make me feel better with some testosterone. Like, there's a lot more to this. Should people be self-diagnosing and making these choices without talking to a doctor who knows them?
There's obviously a level of shared decision making.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt, but I think the line quickly blurs. A lot of people have their mind made up, again, like we said at the outset, a lot of people have their mind made up because they've heard, and it's this pervasive idea that there's an age-related decline in testosterone. So as soon as I hit 40, 50, it's got to be related to this. All that I'm feeling is related to this issue. And not that you don't explore that, but you just need to explore that with caution. You know what I mean? You need to explore that with a practitioner that you trust. You need to be realistic about, maybe the set of underlying, comorbid conditions that you have. You need to be open about having potentially, subclinical underlying comorbid conditions that can be the driving factor of if you end up with a low serum testosterone. And so it's just, it's just amazing. It's just really amazing how, again, how pervasive this, it's like this one thing is, again, it's just, we're very biased that we have to have these conversations a lot. We're in a very biased bubble, so to speak. So I know we've tailored a lot of this conversation to the 40s through 70s, and that's generally where we see hypogonadism. Of course, there is the possibility that this can occur, pre-puberty, and that leads to a whole set of, developmental delays.
Sure.
But again, we have this sort of tailored to a certain demographic, but I would be remiss not to at least mention that, hey, you're in your 30s and you're still thinking about kids, even though it's just testosterone and it's what your body's producing. Once you jump into supplemental testosterone, you do run the risk, theoretically, of shutting down, at least maybe temporarily, your body's natural production. Not that you can't jumpstart that. There's a lot of, really talented bodybuilders who probably know even more than we do about it. But in general, there's still something to be said about, exogenous testosterone, in your 30s. And because of how pervasive this is and how widely available it is and how easy it is to get your hands on it, there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah.
It's just a matter, there's always a risk benefit.
It's a big topic, and I know we've barely scratched the surface of it. Joey's got an entire stack of papers here, and he's only gone through a couple of them. So I guess we'll be back here before too terribly long. That's why we do this weekly, is so that we can come back often. Anything we mentioned product-wise is available on our website. I don't think we did, but it's available on our website, Ask Joe DiMatteo, AskJoeDimatteo.com. If you've got any questions, we want you to email those to us, questions@AskJoeDiMatteo, whether they're about testosterone or hormones or HRT or anything else you got going on in your life medically. We want to hear about it. We want to try and answer those questions for you. Questions@AskJoeDimatteo.com. If you want to know about the articles that we referenced, any of the research that these boys have done, we're going to have all of that available down in the show notes. You can see those down below. Please give it a thumbs up or a like or a 5-star review. More importantly than anything else, if you enjoy this show or you think it's got valuable information, please share it with someone. That is the best way to tell the algorithm that other people need to be watching this and for it to then share. So please share it with people. Big thanks, as always, to Josiah Schweinberg, our engineer, Michael Deppish, our editor, Joyce Gibb, our nurse practitioner, Diane Silverman, who handles our product, Terry, who does scheduling, Cecilia, who does distribution. That's Dante DiMatteo. That's Joey DiMatteo. And I'm Tyler Andrews. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys next week.